Recording? What's up, my fellow unicorns? It's your boy Chris Casanova coming at you with some straight talk. We're here in Barrie at Casa Cappuccino, I believe it is called, and I am going to pass it over to my co-host.
Hey everybody, it's J Mac. My pronouns are he and him. Glad you joined us. We're at Casa Cappuccino in Barrie, Ontario, and we're meeting with Simcoe Pride to actually talk about Pride in Simcoe County, which is a huge, huge area and a huge undertaking, and I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves.
Hey there, my name is Brandon Rail Amiot. I'm the president of Fierté Simcoe Pride. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you today about what's going on in our region, a bit of our history, and Pride. Yeah.
There better be lots of confetti. I'm expecting it. And a unicorn.
Well, we'll see if I can pull that out my sleeve.
So maybe you want to tell us how you manage. There's different city halls, there's different areas. It's like a huge, huge region, and maybe you want to touch on that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So just to give you an idea of the size of our region, we cover a region that's almost the size of PEI in terms of geographic land mass. It's just under 6,000 square miles, so quite a large region. We cover 21 communities. So we have the county of Simcoe, which is the 22nd. We have 16 towns and townships, 2 cities, Canadian Forces Base Borden, and 2 First Nations. So it's a really, really large region. Barrie, where we're here today, is one of the 22 communities that we cover, and we do our best to host Pride events throughout the region. That gives you a sense of the scope. In terms of how we manage it, quite honestly, it's been a work in progress. This year we've launched a number of subcommittees, regional subcommittees, and we hope to continue to do that to help carry the workload. And we've been working on, expanding our reach into different regions over the last 8 years.
That's a big region. I get it. I am confused just thinking about all the things that we got to talk about here. All right, so what are some of the difficulties that you would obviously come across when trying to coordinate all these different townships and over such a large region?
Well, I think there's the usual. Prides in general and 2S LGBTQ organizations in Canada struggle financially. There aren't many specific grants to our community or specific funds, and often we have to rely on small businesses and local unions, which isn't a problem so much as it is that they only have so much capacity. Now, in terms of Simcoe County specifically, because we cover such a large region, it often means that we're having to try and pull together from different sources in order to fund or to support the work that we're doing. Certainly work in progress. One of the ways we do that is by partnering, and we're really about collaboration as an organization, and that helps us to be able to serve, small communities like Midland. We just hosted an open mic night poetry slam, and that was done through support of a local business who hosted us, and some local community members who helped get the word out and helped do some of the planning. So it's those small things that really make Pride happen, not just during our festivities but throughout the year. But there's always more that can be done, and we see that there's some changes happening that will hopefully benefit not just our organization, which is largely rural and small town, but also other organizations.
So some of the things that we've noticed, like around Pride, is that many people have forgotten about political activism, that, Pride actually started as a riot 50 years ago. So we're not encouraging anybody to riot, of course, but we want to remember that history. So how do you find the balance between political activism and Pride and celebrations, and within trying to keep that community together in that kind of reminding them that we are still struggling in some areas around the LGBTQ community? And how do you maintain the political activism side while you're maintaining that balance of celebration and so forth?
I think for us, it's recognizing Pride means many different things to many people, and it doesn't necessarily mean one thing to everyone. So for many people, it's a multifaceted event or movement. Our theme this year is actually Our History, Our Future, en français, Notre Histoire, Notre Avenir. and we're very much trying to, pull in that history, acknowledging that historically and to this day our movement is still political, or I would argue should be. But it's also about celebration. It's about a community, about family, and so for us, the way that we balance out those ways of having Pride happen is by ensuring that there's a diversity of people, not only in our board, but in our volunteer base. Our board's been lucky enough to have HIV positive people, women, two-spirit people, trans folks, non-binary folks, youth, seniors. We've always tried to keep that balance. And the other way is we consult with community. So we have an annual consultation following our Pride festivities, and we also do a lot of other work in terms of consultation, whether it's at our coffee socials we have every month in 4 different communities, whether it's just asking key groups, what are their views on different things. We really try to balance it out as best we can. In terms of being political, we live in a region where that a lot of people would say that that's quite a big, bold move. I wouldn't say it's necessarily bold. I think it's built within organizing in this region. Being so small, we have some really dedicated people. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's about balance. And if you involve community in your work, you're always going to have that balance. Not that it's without its struggles, but it's worth it at the end of the day.
Speaking of community, there have been a lot of posts online talking about how the heterosexual cisgender people are, not saying that they're actually trying to do this, but invading our space. So what sort of advice would you give people who may not necessarily be part of the community but want to present themselves as allies, who are entering our space and joining us in our celebrations? Like, how would you recommend they behave themselves, et cetera, et cetera?
I think it comes back to the principles of what is allyship. I think first and foremost, there is a misconception about what it means to be an ally. Ally is a verb, not a noun. So it should be an action, not something you call yourself. In fact, I know some great allies who won't even call themselves an ally, but they rather let their actions speak for themselves, and I think that that's a good place to start. Being an ally involves knowing the history of our community, both locally and in a broad sense. Means you should try to know the terminology. It's about communication. If there's a situation, for example, where someone's maybe not out to a certain group of people but is out to another, you should be having, as an ally, a discussion with that person about when is it appropriate for me to use those pronouns or this name, your chosen name, and when is it not appropriate. When do you want me to jump in if someone's misgendering you, and when do you not want me to, and how does that look? So it's about a lot of communication, and it's about viewing yourself rather than being the person speaking, being the amplifier. Your position is to amplify voices. And rather than standing behind or in front, you should be standing beside us. In terms of to go to your question about, taking up too much space, it does go back to those principles about standing beside, not in front. Pride festivities did come out of a protest, and in many cases are still a protest, at least to some extent. So it's important that when allies are coming to our spaces, they don't take up too much space. And I think it is important sometimes to have spaces that are specifically for LGBTQ people. So that's one of the ways we can help balance it out. But in terms of Pride, our allies are important for sure. Both politicians, community organizations, and just everyday allies, from parents to friends. Those are the folks who often get us through the tough times, the people who can be vocal when we can't be. So it's just about engaging with our community in a more fulsome way to ensure that when you're being an ally, you're doing it in a way that's reflective of what the community wants and needs.
So let's actually talk a little bit about the LGBT community in itself. Being, it's really important to recognize that we struggle when we're allies within our own community. So, what would you suggest? How do we kind of broaden that? How do we get more supportive of each other within the LGBT community to make sure that our trans folks are being heard, or a person of color is being heard, or a marginalized part of our community is being heard? So, how would you kind of handle that? How would you kind of take that approach?
I think we have to recognize that, just because we're members of the 2S LGBTQ community does not absolve us of other privileges. Our identities are intersectional. We're not a monolithic community. No one is really. No community is. So we have to recognize that first. I think in terms of, different struggles within the community, there's a lot of lateral violence, which is a term that essentially means it's a more nuanced way of describing infighting, I suppose, that can sometimes be expressed through internalized homophobia or transphobia, internalized racism, so on and so forth. Our community has gone through a lot of trauma. And there is a long history of that. So that's to be expected. In terms of how we engage with each other, I think it's important to listen. Again, those principles of allyship apply to us too. So we have to recognize that in our intersectional identities, that's how we have to approach things. So if you're, myself, I'm a Haudenosaunee person who's, and as much as I identify as Two-Spirit, I recognize that I walk with a certain amount of privilege in the way that I present. So I have to, I myself choose not to, or I try not to take up too much space and share it with people who may have more experience in terms of racism or anti-Indigenous racism. And that's a personal way that I do that. It looks different for everyone, but I think it's about communication. It's about self-reflection, which can be really difficult. And I think we have to, I think the problem is we struggle between this individualistic versus a community. And even when it comes to things like self-care, we often think about self-care as like a very thing we do on our own, but what about community care? How are we taking care of each other? So we have to see ourselves as a group, and we are a group. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that. I know I do at times. So I hope that answers the question, but I think it's connected with the principles of allyship. It's connected with our identities that are not monolithic, but rather intersectional. I know that whole intersectionality gets thrown around a lot, and people don't always understand it, but really just means that we have multiple identities within who we are, and sometimes those identities conflict with other members of our community in terms of how we go about walking this path.
In terms of struggles that the community normally faces when it comes to these sorts of events, maybe not necessarily within the community itself, but what sort of, I guess the only word I can think of is hate do you receive from outside the community in regards to us trying to organize these things and trying to have spaces where we can feel safe and everyone can feel included?
There's probably a master's thesis on that somewhere, or a PhD. I think if I could pick one thing to make it simple, it's just a lack of education. The number one thing I see in Simcoe County is people commenting on news articles saying, well, gays have all their rights, so why do we need pride? Why do they get a flag? Why do we have flag raisings? Why the rainbow crosswalk, And I think it just comes down to folks don't understand why pride. Why do we still have pride? Why did it start in the first place? I think if those folks who maybe are naysayers or have doubts or have misunderstandings, I think if they just sat down with community members and had a cordial conversation with them, they'd learn very quickly why we still do this work. We recently saw the discussion that happened around the rainbow crosswalk that's going just out in that square there. And some people, I think it was just bordering on homophobia in many cases and transphobia. I think it was just a lack of understanding. And I think, had the counselors, for example, reached out to community ahead of time, they would have quickly learned why it is that even these symbolic things can make a really big difference in communities of our size, or any community for that matter. but it's other things too, like when we organized the first trans pride march in Simcoe County with local trans community, we got hate mail, and I got on my personal social media, got some really awful messages. And I think what those people didn't understand is why we were doing it. Might have been partly that they didn't read the article where we featured the fact that we were doing it. We did answer kind of why we're doing it. It was about talking about trans rights, which very simply at the time in 2016 still weren't enshrined federally. Now they have been, but legislation is only one half of the equation. The other half is social change, which takes a lot longer. So holding these events, not only being visible but being loud, being front and center, are important. And there's so many other reasons why Pride, but I think that's where it comes down to is, the folks should just reach out to us, have a discussion, and if you're asking a question genuinely, and not just to bait someone into a debate, you'll more than likely find the answer within a 10-minute conversation, or a half-hour conversation, or over a number of conversations. It's really just about reaching out and learning.
So actually, Simcoe Pride has done some amazing things around community consultation. Why is that so important for a Pride organization?
It's hard to say that it's easy to do. I think for us, we have the challenge of being a large region, which means we have to balance a lot of different demographics and experiences. So we have to, but we should anyways. Have those consultations. So for us, that looks like having surveys, having town halls or round tables, or just being intentional about asking that question at our events. We might say at the beginning of one of our Pride socials, like here at Casa Cappuccino, what are your thoughts on this? And you don't have to answer now, but think about it over the duration of this meet. And if you want to just write it down, share it with us, send us an email, we have to be intentional. It's not enough to just have open communication. It's very easy to go on social media and engage, and don't get me wrong, that's very important, but being intentional about asking the questions and receiving the responses, and using them to forward your work, to change how your work looks, to meet the needs or the wants of community. Why is it important? Quite simply because we're not a monolithic community. We have a lot of different things that we have to do. Fierte Simcoe Pride, trying to be proactive, but also because of some engagement from community members, launched a consultation on police and military participation last year, at the end of last year, and had a survey open for a few months around the issue. And very soon we'll be holding some telephone town halls to kind of finalize it. But that sort of data is important because not only do we get a sense of where is the community at, but where do they want to be. It helps us to have those conversations with whomever it might be, so in this case police and military, about what do they need to do moving forward to build relationship, and to respond to those concerns. Or it's things more simple, like if we're doing, for example, we're hoping to do a Pride prom this summer during our festivities. We ask people, what did you miss at your prom experience that you'd want to see that night? What are the sort of things that we can do to make it that experience that you deserve? We want you to feel special.
Brandon, you did some surveys around your Pride organizations. What was one of the biggest takeaways you saw of your Pride organization survey? I think it was last year or the year before?
Last year, yeah.
Yeah, what was the biggest takeaway out of that?
Gosh. I mean, if I really had to pick one, I think it's just that it's time to grow. Plain and simple, but in a more nuanced sense, we need to grow sustainably. We need to grow in a way that it just isn't, we've grown relatively slow over the past 8 years, or rather strategically, and it'll still be strategic, but what community said is they need more from us. And we have a responsibility to provide that. So that's what we're working on trying to do this year, is to grow what we're doing. The subcommittees that we've formed in Barrie, the Trans Pride subcommittee, so on, are going to help us do that. That's not the only way, but that's certainly one big way that we're taking a step forward. And some of our work with Fierte Canada Pride, in terms of getting federal funding through tourism and through Canadian heritage, will also be a part of that. And that doesn't just benefit us, but also prides across Canada. So I think that that's the takeaway, is that we need to grow, and like I said, sustainably.
So when you're looking for corporate sponsorship, which is usually a touchy subject for many people, how do you find the corporate sponsors that are in line with the philosophy around Pride and the LGBT community and inclusion?
That's a work in progress for us. We are in a smaller community, so as I said, we've mainly had support from small businesses, from people who are self-employed and unions, as well as a lot of in-kind support. But of course, financially, there has to be finances to back up what you're doing, especially covering such a large region with such a growing and diverse population. For us, it's about knowing who it is you're talking with. So we always like to have a conversation first. Who is it? Not just the individuals, but also what is your corporate vibe? What's built within your organization? Do you have policies around around our community, and how hiring practices, around good labor laws, other intersectional matters? So I think that that's one of the ways we start that conversation, and we also try to build those relationships. So, for example, we've had partners in the past where we found that the event that they were sponsoring just didn't work, and so trying to rejig that to being something more meaningful. So we might have an organization that works in mental health. Well, it makes sense for them to support our Candlelight Vigil, because that is a bit about mental health and about wellness, and about survivors and things like that. So I think it's about building an actual relationship, and it's about making sure that their support of us is also backed up by work that they're doing outside of just supporting us. How are they supporting the community as a whole, internally and externally?
I got something I want to add to this. Thank you very much. Now, there may be some people or businesses or potential sponsors that may say something along the lines of, I don't want to get involved because of this reason or that reason, or it's too messy right now. How do you tackle that sort of thing?
That's tough, for sure. I think really it has to be about community. If a business perhaps feels that they're unsure, then maybe that's a relationship that needs to continue to be built so that they can be in a place where they're sure of what they're doing. It's important that at the end of the day, it be about community. So it's like we wouldn't maybe partner with someone who isn't sure about supporting because of maybe it's too political, or maybe there's a specific issue they have. If it's not best for community, then it doesn't make sense, and it's not something that we would pursue. Speaking for us, I don't know how other organizations operate, but for us, it really has to be about building that relationship beforehand, during, and after the fact. And Pride isn't just it's not like 2 weeks and that's it. It's like we do year-round events. So maybe they're not comfortable, or maybe there's something that just doesn't work for them. Well, we see what does work for them. Where are they at? Because we recognize that learning is a process, and that's true for businesses as it is for people. So our goal is to build those relationships. There are going to be people sometimes that it's just never going to work, and that's okay. There's, for every person who doesn't work, there's going to be at least 2 or 3 that do, and there's relationships that we already have that are really good. And so there's a time where you have to say, okay, this isn't working, maybe we come back to this. I think that would probably be my approach.
Now, what about, because I keep hearing you saying community, which is absolutely amazing that you're trying to include everyone in it. How do you tackle the fact that some young children feel like they identify themselves in the community, whether it's their gender identity or their sexual orientation or anything in between? Like, how? Because I hear a lot that it's hard to teach children about the matter while still remaining appropriate. So how would you address that sort of issue while still making sure they learn the things they need to learn?
I think it's a question of who's defining what's appropriate, first of all. We saw this discussion around the health and physical education curriculum. It has to be about what's best for the youth in that context. It's a benefit to our whole society, but especially those kids, if they know what's happening with their bodies, if they know about those personal and interpersonal relationships that they're having. That's just common sense, I would argue. But there's also evidence to back that up. There was tons of consultation that went into that curriculum, as an example, the 2015 one. In terms of what we do as an organization, there's some other great organizations like the Gilbert Center, businesses like Str8 Pharmacy who've done some actual work around educating youth on sex ed, on sexuality and gender identity. These are things that you should know because it's a human experience. Just as a kid should know about, how to change a tire or, how to do taxes.
I call the CIA.
They should also know what's happening with their bodies, what's going on in their mind. If you start at a young age, it benefits them in the long run because they don't walk through life as confused as they might have been. And starting from a young age isn't really exposing them to anything they're not going to already being exposed to. It's about exposing them in a way that's controlled, that's healthy, and that's coming from someone who's learned in that field. And for us as an organization, we're not just celebration, we're not just political, we're also educational. So we do hold education sessions. We try to, if parents reach out to us and they're like, how do I talk to my kid about this? Is be like, well, there happens to be a PFLAG group that you can go, and as a parent, you can learn about how other parents have done it. That peer support is really important, not only for youth, but for parents, in understanding our community and understanding why these things are important.
So let's jump into your pride as you kind of move into that area. How many flag ceremonies are you doing?
So we don't have all of them confirmed yet, but last year, the year before, 2 years ago was our very first year where we had all 22 communities supporting Pride, either through flag raising or proclamation.
22 flag raising.
Yeah.
And what kind of space of time?
So the flag raisings usually take place, there is a jump day, so there's usually a day where we do them in the second week of our festivities, but it takes about 5 days altogether to do the flag raisings, sometimes 6 flag raisings a day, and that's about, it could be up to 8 hours of driving depending, with the speeches and the meeting and the snacks and the luncheons that happen during. So it's pretty full days, and they're one of our most attended and most popular events.
Now, on the topic of events, what kind of things do you organize for your Simcoe Pride? Do you have drag shows? Do you have, I don't know, meet and greets, or like just general get-togethers? We're having a foam party. So what sort of things do you have that kind of bring the community together?
Well, in terms of the events that we organize, all sorts of events. Last year, including the flag raisings, we had over 35 events over 2 weeks, so it's quite packed. But again, we cover a large region, so when you think about it, it's like a few events in each community sort of thing. We will have the 5th annual Simcoe County Pride Awards Gala this year, being hosted at Base Borden, which is a big step forward. And that gala, honors our community for the work it does year round, whether it's a youth, a person, business, organization, or community. We always have an honorary award too, so stay tuned for that. Very soon we'll be announcing the open nomination process. We will have the 4th annual Trans Pride March this year in Aurelia. That's always a great event, and we usually follow it up with like a dinner at a local restaurant. Flag raisings, as I said. We're hoping to do something honoring our history. We have quite a large history in this county going back to the 1980s, and a lot of it's kind of unexplored or unknown. So we'll be doing some stuff around that. We're still working on those plans. As I talked about our subcommittees, one of the subcommittees that's recently formed that we have one representative on is the Berries Subcommittee, and they're hoping to manage the parade and festival in Barrie this year. So there will be those festivities. And we're also looking at things like the return of our candlelight vigil, which will honor all those we've lost, all those who have struggled, those who fought for us, and the fight ahead. So that'll be a good touch to our festivities. We are hoping to do a Pride Prom, as I said. I think it'll be really good. A lot of people have been asking for something like that for a while now, and it's a good return to our first 2 years where we hosted a Pride Prom. But we'll have a youth portion and a 19-plus portion. But yeah, I think that's kind of encapsulates it. The other event that I personally, my favorite, is the Dust to Dawn movie night at the drive-in in Oro-Medonte. It's a great event for family, but everyone's welcome, and it's like a good old-fashioned time, and it's really a unique event because I don't know any other Pride that does a drive-in movie night, and it's fairly unique because we're kind of in cottage country, so it's like quintessential cottage country. It's going to the drive-in. There's a playground there with one of those old merry-go-rounds, and you can go and sit and watch some movies. And if you're feeling gutsy, you stay until 4 a.m. to watch all 4 movies, but it's a really fun time, and yeah, there will be lots of other stuff too, but that's just an idea of some of the events we'll have over the time.
I think a whole bunch of communities don't have drive-ins anymore, and that's the problem.
Yes.
Also, if anyone wants to be my date for prom, hit me up.
This might air after this, so we got
For next year's prom.
There you go. We're all good organized. Brendan, is there anything you just want to pass on about Pride and the importance of it before we kind of sign off?
Sure. I think it's really important, especially for the larger cities, to really support what's happening here in rural and small towns. Simcoe County is highly attended during the summer from people in Toronto, Ottawa, and elsewhere. We have lots of cottages in this area. It's important that you not just show up to our events, but you're also supporting us year-round and being able to do this work. We don't necessarily have the same resources as large cities, and I think for folks here in Simcoe County, it's really important to come to Pride. If there's something that you see that's missing, tell us, and we will do our best to make that happen, whether it's an educational event, a party, whether it's something around advocacy. It's really important, and if people have any other questions, they can go to fiertesimcoepride.com. That's FIERTE Simcoe SIMCOE Pride PRIDE.com, and we have a French and an English website, and you can reach out to us, connect with us on social media, and we'd love to see you out at our festivities. 8th annual festivities this year are July 29th to August 11th, but if this airs after, we'll see you again next year. But we also have events throughout the year, so just check out our website or our monthly newsletter, and you can find out about what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Brandon. We really appreciate you taking the time out because we know you're busy, and I think you have a pasta dinner to kind of throw together tonight. So this is us signing off from Straight Talk. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us and check out Simcoe Pride, which is happening, which date again?
July 29th to August 11th.
Something about dates and us. I don't know what it is, but we seem to screw it up all the time. And we'll be right back with our Takeaway Minute.
Hey, this is your Divine Darling, and we're back for Straight Talk, honey. Yes! And I'm here with a queer trans activist, Ms. Quanah Style, a recording artist, honey! Yes! She's here for Pride from Vancouver, honey. Yes! Quanah, what does Pride mean to you, my love?
Pride to me is a celebration of our humanity, where we can have the freedom to be who we are. Like, I grew up as a little boy. Now I'm a loud and proud trans woman, and that's what Pride is about. It's about us coming together and celebrating our differences and creating a better understanding and acceptance of our differences, of what it means to be gay or trans.
Ooh, you heard it right here at Straight Talk, honey. Make some noise to Miss Quanah Styles. Ow! Divine Darling, out.